Carson Wentz has been cut by the Washington Commanders. The one-year experiment did not work. But first, thank you to Pristine Auction for sponsoring today's video. If you somehow haven't heard of PristineAuction.com, they are the most trusted sports memorabilia and collectibles auction site. Auctions start at just $1 and there are thousands of things on auction every day. So you can win signed authentic signatures at an affordable price. Just last week, an autographed Travis Kelce jersey sold for $110. Deals like that are happening all the time, and you can find just about any player you want. You can win items whether you're on the marketplace or on the iOS or Android app, and each item comes with a certificate of authenticity from some of the industry's most reputable authenticators. Upgrade your collection of signed memorabilia today and use code JDPROD for $10 off your first auction won. But wait, Pristine Auction has also supplied us with a giveaway for y'all. Here is your chance to win a signed Travis Kelce full-sized speed replica helmet. All you have to do is sign up on the Pristine Auction website and use our code JDPROD to be entered. Again, use code JDPROD for $10 off your first auction won on Pristine Auction and a chance to win a signed Travis Kelce helmet. Links are in the description down below, and thank you again to Pristine Auction for sponsoring today's video. The Washington Commanders traded for Carson Wentz in the offseason, giving up a second, third, and a conditional third to the Colts. He was the expected starter all offseason, and that was the case once it came around. He started Washington's first 6 games of the year, and he had his ups and downs. The Commanders beat Jacksonville in week 1, and Wentz did end up looking pretty good. He threw for 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, but he did have 2 picks. Then Washington lost its next 4 games. Wentz played well in week 2 with 300 yards and 3 touchdowns to only 1 interception. So he had a really good first 2 games, but then his next 4, well, they didn't go as well. Over that 4-game span, Wentz only had 839 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. From week 2 to 15, Washington lost all of their games. Wentz had a game-sealing pick in the red zone, and the Titans lost 2, and then Washington did finally win in week 6, which was actually on Thursday Night Football against the Bears after really just a really bad Chicago fumble. And in that game, well, Wentz ended up suffering a fractured finger on his throwing hand, and he ended up landing on injured reserve. Taylor Heinicke took over as the starter, and he ended up playing pretty solid. And just all of a sudden, Washington was winning, but after the Commanders hit a bit of a rough patch, Ron Rivera opted to bench Heinicke for Wentz. The decision to start Carson Wentz instead of Taylor Heinicke, let's just say it backfired in a huge way in week 17 versus Cleveland. Wentz sucked. He completed 16 of 28 passes for just 142 yards and threw 3 interceptions. He looked horrible, and Commanders fans even booed him off the field, and then the next week, Sam Howell ended up starting. Everyone knew that Carson Wentz was going to be cut after the year. He was a $26.2 million cap hit if he was actually rostered in 2023. Washington clearly felt like they couldn't trust him, and it seems like everyone is just always against him in situations, especially when he was in Indianapolis. The Colts were this new scenery second chance for Wentz after Philly, one that he really needed to make good on, and statistically he did. Wentz was reunited with Frank Reich, who was the Colts head coach and Wentz's old OC in Philly, and the two did work well together again. He got off to a pretty rough start in Indy and needed foot surgery in the offseason, but then he ended up playing in every single game, passing for over 3,500 yards with 27 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions. Statistically, he was good, but with how everything ended, it left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Indy narrowly lost to the Raiders in week 17, and it set up a win and you're in scenario for week 18. All the Colts had to do was beat the very depressing back-to-back worst team in football the Jaguars, and they came out and looked awful. Wentz and everyone just looked sluggish and didn't play well. It was a horrendous end to the year that at times did actually show some promise. He got a lot of flack for the way things ended in Indy, and now the same thing is happening after his tenure in Washington. It seems like Carson Wentz is just about done as a starter in the NFL, but man, sometimes it is easy to forget how good he was supposed to be. Carson Wentz played college football at NDSU, North Dakota State University, from 2012 to 2015, and he was a two-time FCS national champion, and he was named the most outstanding player of that championship game in both seasons. Wentz ended up having a pretty successful college career with 5,105 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. He also rushed for 1,028 yards and 13 touchdowns. As a senior in 2015, Wentz was limited to only 7 games due to a wrist injury, but it didn't matter. He still impressed a lot of NFL scouts. You know, he had the size, the athleticism, he had the arm strength, and he just shot up draft boards. Carson Wentz was one of the top quarterback prospects at the 2016 draft, even despite playing at the FCS level. He was considered a little raw, but he did have a lot of upside. He ended up really skyrocketing up the boards after he had a really good combine performance, and he measured in at 6'5", 237 pounds, and he even ran a 4.77 for a quarterback. Overall, his numbers, a 30.5-inch vert and a 9'10" broad jump were just pretty good for a guy that was 6'5". He ended up going second overall at the draft to the Eagles, and Wentz was expected to be the savior for Philadelphia and then possibly lead them to their first Super Bowl victory, and he, in a way, he did. Wentz was spectacular in his second year in the league. He threw for 3,296 yards and 33 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, while he pushed the Eagles out to an 11-2 record. But then in Week 14, Wentz suffered a torn ACL. Nick Foles took over and led Philadelphia to its first Super Bowl win, with Wentz on the sideline. Wentz was a second-team All-Pro, and he made the Pro Bowl. He was expected to come back strong, and he did, but he was shut down with a back injury before the playoffs the next season. Foles went in, and he led the Eagles to another playoff win. Wentz was even good in Philadelphia the season after. He had over 4,000 yards and 27 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. The Eagles ended up making the playoffs, and in the wild card, Wentz did finally start, but he suffered a concussion after just 9 snaps. 2019 ended up being the truly disastrous season for Wentz. The Eagles dealt with injuries, and Wentz struggled. Finally, Doug Peterson decided enough was enough, and he benched Wentz in favor of Jalen Hurts. Hurts showed some promise in his time starting, enough to make him the future in Philadelphia. Wentz only played in 12 games on the year, and despite that, he did still lead the league in 3 different numbers: interceptions, turnovers, and sacks taken. It led to him being traded to the Colts, who turned around and traded him to Washington. The future for Carson Wentz is definitely a bit cloudy. He's still an absolute NFL-level quarterback, and any idea that he will be playing in something lower, like the XFL, is absurd. But there is a serious question of whether or not he's a top 32 guy in the league. In terms of teams that Wentz could actually start for in any capacity, there might actually be a few. I think the Buccaneers are clearly the top option, and they do have maybe the worst quarterback situation in the league. Who knows what Trask has, and Wentz very well may be able to beat him in a competition, but I have to imagine the Buccaneers do want to see at least what they have in him. That's the clear favorite, but another team I could kind of see is somewhere like Atlanta, a team that doesn't have a starter and is kind of looking for answers, and the Falcons probably want to at least figure out what they have in Desmond Ridder. I think, unfortunately, Wentz is best off going somewhere to be like a high-paid backup and be able to step into a good, already established offense, and I think the most reasonable spot for that is the Chiefs. I mean, Wentz has won a Super Bowl by doing nothing in the big game already. He's perfect for Kansas City. Chad Henne retiring leaves the Chiefs with a hole at backup, and who knows, maybe sitting behind Patrick Mahomes can be enough for teams to want to take a shot on Wentz in the future.